taking control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all connected but separated, misunderstood and so frustrated. A million armies of one have invaded, watching you and watching me. We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. The little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye, we're the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching have taken over. We the people are little brother, standing by to dethrone each other, watching you and watching me. Paranoid, the lens is our weapon, desensitized in our lust for attention, democratized by our voyeur obsessions, watching you and watching me. Lives to perfection, don't let them project you as you are. Reveal your every flaw. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye, we're the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of Spaced Out Radio or Spaced Out Radio Limited is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced?
Stop right there!
From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you, listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott. You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on iTunes and TuneIn. Follow Dave on Twitter at spacedoutradio.com, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show.
Game on! Game on! Game on!
Dave, oh Dave, are you playing with Bigfoot and aliens again?
The password is...
Alright.
Okay, seriously, what's with the pointies?
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio. Mr. Bumblefoot, Dave is ready for liftoff.
Seriously, Dave? Really?
Chloe. Bye-bye. Love you. Bye-bye.
Captain, take your seat on my left. It's time for takeoff.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 2, 1, boost ignition, and liftoff.
Just to be there with you, and I still trip over my feet, and my heart still skips a beat. I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall. The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Space Out Radio. Tonight I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you along for the ride. Wherever you are on this planet we call Earth, we are live right here in Uncle Jimbo's cabin, right here in the Great White North as we come to you live on this Monday night, early Tuesday morning if you're on the East Coast. Let's welcome in everyone listening in at spacedoutradio.com, on Spreaker, on the United Public Radio Network, on the High Plains Talk Radio Network, Revolution Radio, and of course, right here live with me. If you're sitting beside me, which you're not, but it's kind of fun. We do this thing every night of the week as we rock in and out of every single show. Thanks to our resident guitar god, Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses. Bumblefoot is the official sound of Spaced Out Radio. Also, you can give us a follow on Twitter if you're a social media junkie like I am. Give our Facebook page a like. Spaced Out Radio Show on Instagram. You can follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes. And, of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. While there, we will get you to check out a plethora of features, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. If you want to take part in this show, what you got to do is sign into one of our chat rooms, because we do not take phone calls on this show very, very often. So, you can go on Revolution Radio. You can go on the UPRN chat room. You can check us out on our Facebook chat room, the SOR Space Travelers Club. Or if you're on Twitter, go to hashtag Spaced Out Radio. I will get to your questions in there as well. If you haven't signed up for the SOR Space Travelers Club yet, it is time, because we are only $5 a month, and with that, your name gets entered in a monthly prize draws. You get access to private group interviews. You get access to a special section for posting on our website, and so much more. Hey, we're going to give you a heck of a lot more than just access to our archives. While it's Spaced Out Radio, you can read my latest blog, check out Eric Markham's SOR Spacewire for your latest and weird news. And if you've had an experience you just can't explain, head to our website, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Our researcher Mike Schmidt is ready to find out what's going on with you. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on Renegade Talk Radio. We are live in Las Vegas. Yes, I love Sin City. If you want to be a part of it in New Orleans, just tune in to 107.7 FM, the United Public Radio Network. We are live right now, and there are listeners with us at over 160 countries around the world. And remember, if you're listening in on the Double R machine, yes, Revolution Radio is the largest nonprofit online radio station going today. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. We have talked a lot about Mars on this show. Now, it usually involves the secret space program or something that is very controversial or right out of a sci-fi comic book. But tonight, we look at the serious side of the red planet. And this is what we do know. Through satellite imagery and, of course, a couple of wandering rovers, we know that Mars is a desolate place. We know it has an atmosphere, but it would be toxic to humans. We know it has daytime and nighttime. No NFL or NHL, so the sports fans are out. And of course, we know there once was water on it. But could it sustain life? Could we make it Earth 2.0? Dr. Robert Zubrin is one of the most intriguing possibilities, or claims it is, in our solar system. His creation in 1998, the Mars Society, is the world's largest and most influential space advocacy organization dedicated to human exploration and settlement of the planet Mars. His group works to educate the public and the media, government as well, on the benefits of exploring Mars and creating a permanent human presence on the red planet. We welcome in Dr. Robert Zubrin. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for inviting me on your show.
Thank you. And we got Eric Markham here as well. Thank you, Eric, for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Doctor, I did try and get a hold of you back on Skype. For some reason, it just was not hooking up, so I had to call you on your phone. I hope you don't mind.
Not at all.
Tonight is going to be a very, very interesting conversation for us, because we had a lot of conversations about Mars. And I think when you deal in the paranormal, the supernatural, the conspiratorial like we do on a nightly basis, there's a lot of people who believe we've already been to Mars. There's a lot of people who already believe that there's something hidden up there. And then there's people such as yourself who are bringing a real scientific method to this that say, look, humanity is getting a little bit filling down here on the planet Earth. Maybe it's time to look at phase 2 of expansion. And before we get into that, Doctor, what got you into the intrigue of Mars?
Well, the thing that got me interested in Mars was Sputnik. I was 5 when Sputnik flew. And while to the adults it may have been a terrifying event because it meant the Russians could hit us, to me, as a child, I was already reading science fiction at that time. It was exhilarating. It meant that all these stories I was reading about the spacefaring future were going to be true. And I wanted to be part of it. And so I read everything I could about space and planets and so forth, and it became clear to me very quickly that Mars was the best chance, that Mars was the planet that had the most chance of supporting life. Mars was the planet that we could settle on. And So I was into Mars from then on out.
Very, very interesting in regards to that, because I think a lot of people, when they look up into the stars at night and they see the constellations, they see Jupiter, they see Mars when it's lit up, it seems so far away and such a distance that it's only a dream. Is that possible? And do you think we have the technology to even start to stretch up there now?
Sure. And I mean, look, it's just incredible to me, you know. When I was growing up in the 60s, and, you know, and this month we were putting a man in orbit, and 3 months later it'd be 2 people in orbit, then people were doing spacewalks, and then we were going with 3 people, and then around the moon, and then to the moon. I mean, it was something new, you know, every month, every 2 months that we were pushing beyond, and I was 17 when we finally landed. And if anybody had told me then that we'd be here in the year 2017 and we wouldn't be on Mars or even the moon, I would have just thought they were crazy. I mean, the failure of the space program since Apollo to live up to its previous level of accomplishment is astonishing. It is a case of massive failure of political leadership, of world historic proportions. It'd be as if Columbus had come back from the New World the first time and Ferdinand and Isabella had said, "Oh, so what? Just go away. We don't care about this." And, I mean, that's basically what happened. And, you know, NASA had plans to be on Mars by 1981, and they could have been done. And if they, and a permanent Mars base by the late 80s, and if that had happened, you know, 30 years ago, having a permanent Mars base, you know, the first children born on Mars would probably be graduating college on Mars right about now. I mean, it is just the idea that people can look at this and say, "Oh, we can't do this," are people who have forgotten what we used to be capable of doing and what we need to be capable of doing again, because we cannot afford to become less than the kind of people we used to be.
Robert, okay, if we were able to, I guess what I'm trying to get, first question I'd like to ask is, how would we be able to establish an atmosphere on Mars? Because the gravity is less. How would we go about terraforming that and keep an atmosphere attached?
There are two different questions here. The questions of sending explorers to Mars and then building bases on Mars is something that we can certainly do in our time. We could have people on Mars within 8 years if we decided to do it, and we could have a permanent base on Mars within 20. Terraforming Mars is a longer-term proposition, but if you want to know about that, sure, let's talk about that. Mars has a weaker gravity than the Earth, but it is strong enough to hold an atmosphere, not forever, but for hundreds of millions of years. The fact that Mars still has some atmosphere today shows that its rate of leakage is not instantaneous. It goes down by a factor of 2 every few 100 million years. So for the human purposes, if we created an atmosphere on Mars, it would stay there as long as we were interested.
Okay. Now, as far as colonizing, all we'd have to do is, inflatable domes.
Well, that's one technology that is possible. First thing, the way I would do it is first, the first expedition lands in their habitat craft, and they live in that. That's their house on Mars. And then we start landing a lot of habitats all at the same place and link them up, and that's our base. And then we can create additional living space, yes, by inflatable domes, initially not that big, 50 yards across, 100 yards across, link them up. These would be transparent. You could grow plants in them. That's where you'd get your greenhouse agriculture. We could also start digging underground, creating large habitable underground zones, kind of like, a subway system, as it were, and do all that. Now, if we want to make the planet habitable, then we have to start doing some other things. Mars was once a warm and wet planet. Warm and wet go together because when you're too cold, all the water freezes, and that's what you have on Mars. You have a lot of frozen water, but no liquid water. Well, how could we warm Mars? Well, we know how to warm planets. We're warming the Earth right now. We need greenhouse gases. Now, people know carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, but we know about designer greenhouse gases that are much more powerful than carbon dioxide, thousands of times more powerful molecule for molecule than carbon dioxide. Things like fluorocarbon gases. And if we set up factories on Mars to make these gases, and we release them into the atmosphere on Mars about the same rate we're currently manufacturing them on Earth. These gases are frequently used on Earth for refrigerants, for example. They're in refrigerators and air conditioners and stuff like that. But we don't put them in refrigerators. We just release them into the air. Within 50 years, we'd warm Mars by 10 centigrade. That's a lot. That's 10 times as much as anybody is thinking that the Earth is going to warm over the next century due to the global warming phenomena that everybody talks about. And if you warm Mars by that much, well, first of all, a lot of carbon dioxide that's soaked into the soil would be outgassed, and that thickened the atmosphere a lot, and they would add to the greenhouse effect too. And then you would start getting the water that's frozen into the soil and as ice to melt, and the streams of Mars would flow again. And the lakes and ponds and even the oceans of Mars would start to fill up again. And there would be rain, and it would be possible to start spreading plants all over the planet and putting oxygen in the atmosphere. And that would take centuries, although as technology advances, our ability to do this kind of stuff will speed up. We can do things right now in a decade that would have taken 1,000 years, in ancient times. And I think that in 200 years, Mars would be terraformed.
Dr. Zubrin, I'm wondering about the lost trust in space exploration. At what point do you think not only America, but the world really lost trust in this? Because America was such a great leader with NASA, with the Apollo project, and then when we got into space shuttles, well, that only took us up, 300 miles or so. Where did we lose interest in going further?
Well, what do you mean by we? There are some people that have lost interest, and some people have lost trust or hope, if you will, in the space program. And it's amazing how much support there is for it, given that the robots keep moving out, but the human space program has completely stagnated since the 1970s, and in fact, has gone backwards. And people still support it. That is, we're still supporting it. 18, 19, $20 billion a year right now, in the hope that it will get moving again. If they keep stagnating, if they keep, postponing taking on the challenge, for instance, of humans to Mars, eventually people will lose patience and the space program will collapse. But, I think the people had a better understanding of what the space program was about in the 1960s than the government class did. For them, it was just about combating the Russians in the Cold War competition. And it did work that way. I could tell you a story about that, but there's no question that we really showed the world what free people could do. And for the political class, though, that was all there was to it. And once they had done it, they lost interest in doing it. But there were a lot of people even then who understood that what this was about was creating a new future for humanity. You know, when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, he said, this is a giant leap for mankind. Now, why was it a giant leap? Because the United States defeated the Soviet Union in a Cold War game. I mean, look, the Soviet Union doesn't even exist anymore. You know, 200 years from now, only history buffs will even know what it was. And but nevertheless, people will remember the moon landing, not as an element of the Cold War competition, but as a decisive moment in the transformation of humanity from a single planet to a multi-planet spacefaring species. And because that's what its significance is. Just like today, I mean, there's some people that don't like Columbus, but everyone recognizes that he's a important historical figure. Even though he failed to provide this Spanish crown with a spice route to India, what he did do was set in motion the forces that led to the creation of our country and actually the global expansion of Western civilization. And I think, that moon landing was not an affair of the moment. That was for the ages. And, so people are waiting for this thing to resume. NASA did an incredibly great job in its first decade and a half of existence. But after that, partly due to its own fault and partly due to the political class, it slowed down, and it's still living off that capital, but that won't last forever. They have to get going again.
Do you think that maybe that type of exploration, with everything that has happened out in the world, the military-industrial complex, we see people, struggling to make their own money. We see people, struggling to pay rent. Do you think that maybe it doesn't have the support as it used to because there are so many earthly problems today going on that people just don't have time to worry about a space program?
No. First of all, you have to realize that people are a lot better off today than they were in the 1960s in this country and worldwide. The U.S. today has twice the population but 4 times the GNP in real dollars that it had in the 1960s. So the average American is actually making about twice as much. And furthermore, in the 1960s, we had people burning down cities because of frustration over poverty and segregation. And we had a real external military threat. With all due respect to ISIS and so forth, the Warsaw Pact with its, 20,000 nuclear warheads and, 30,000 military aircraft and 200 divisions was really a lot more impressive. And so we had some pretty serious stuff to worry about in the 1960s, and we were able to do this. You might say that it was almost the times made us tougher that allowed us to do it. Not just the Cold War, but look, the people who did Apollo were the younger generation or the younger brothers of the generation who did World War II, who won World War II. John F. Kennedy was a PT boat captain, okay? And, he was not a person who would say we can't do something unless we know it's safe, which is the attitude of people in government today. So you might say that at that time, even though we were poor and we had much more problems on our hands, we were tougher. So maybe our success has made us soft. But we've got to get our toughness back, because there are things to be done.
Dr. Zubrin, how much of the enthusiasm for the space program in the 60s? Okay, I was born in 63, so this stuff was going on when I was barely cognizant of what was going on around me. I vaguely remember some of it. But how much of that was due to Kennedy and Johnson pushing it and having an enthusiasm for it, even if it was politically motivated? It seems like all the toys were space themed, all the cartoons were space themed, and we don't have that anymore.
Well, that's true to some extent. I mean, look, there's no question that Kennedy exerted leadership. Okay? Leadership, courageous, visionary leadership. And, when he announced that we were going to go to the moon before this decade was out, we had 15 minutes of human spaceflight experience. We didn't even know if people could eat in space. Okay? I mean, we had a suborbital flight. We hadn't even gone into orbit. The Russians had done one orbit. And yet he said, we can do it. And how did he know we could do it? Because he knew that America could do anything. And he believed that, and he knew it. And he was right. And, now it's like, well, how do you know that we can do it? How do you know it'll be safe? How do you know? I mean, this is not what got us to where we are today. I mean, look, you can go back further. Lewis and Clark, Thomas Jefferson sending this expedition across the continent, 27 men. How do you know this is going to be safe? I mean, 27 men, really, any Indian tribe could have just stuffed them out, to say nothing of natural disasters or, who knows, right? So you have to be willing to do things that you don't know are going to succeed. Because if you're not willing to do things that you don't know are going to succeed, it means you can't do anything you haven't done before, which means you can't do anything. And so yeah, Kennedy was a leader, and I would say we haven't had that kind of leader, at least not in the space realm, since that time. But I would say, though, that while Kennedy was the political leader, there was another group of leaders. And these were the people like Arthur Clarke and Robert Heinlein, and in a different sense, Werner von Braun, and who created the vision that recruited Kennedy. Okay, the ideas make history. Ideas recruit people to their banner, and then those people make it happen. And so we had people spreading the idea and successful in recruiting Kennedy and others, and it happened. But I would say that the number of members of the political class that they managed to recruit was insufficient, because once Kennedy was assassinated and Johnson had to leave office, the Nixon people they just didn't get it, okay? They thought this was just about showing up the Russians. They didn't understand what this was about. Well, here we are. I think there's a lot more people in the public, and therefore the political class, who understand the importance of space today, but we don't have the gutsy leadership. I mean, for Obama, it was just make-believe. Oh, we're going to Mars. Oh, when? Oh, in the 2040s. Like, that has anything to do with him, all right? I mean, if you say, I want this country to do something, 25 years after I leave office, you're not serious. And so this hasn't been serious. Or even Bush, who was talking about a return to the moon in 2004, saying it will be done in 2020, when even if he was reelected, which he was, he wasn't going to be in office after 2008. So it was all just nonsense. If Trump wants to make America great again, he should commit us to have humans on Mars by the end of the second term. That's what he should do. Not come out with a great vision for people to do 20 years after he's gone. That's the game that others have played. It doesn't produce any results. Kennedy said we're going to do this before the end of this decade, essentially before the end of his hoped-for second term. So he was saying he was going to do it, not I'm hoping somebody else will do it.
What we had with the moon and NASA was a completely government-funded project. Do you think Mars is going to be, say Trump decides to gin up support for space exploration. Do you think it's going to be strictly NASA, or do you think it's going to be a combined, like SpaceX, NASA, European Space Agency? It's going to take more than one government using tax dollars to make it happen.
Well, I don't know about more than one government, although I don't think it takes more than one government. I think there will be more than one government involved, because I do think that if the United States leads on this, then certainly the Europeans and Canada and Japan will join us at a minimum, because they'll want to, all right? But it's not that we couldn't afford to do it ourselves. We could certainly afford to do this. But I do think that other Western countries will join us, and I think that's one reason to do it. It's not the most important, but it is an important reason, which is let's pull the free world together again, which it needs to be done. Okay, but but in terms of this, I mean, look, Elon Musk, SpaceX, is already spending his own money to develop many of the flight systems that could, and in my opinion, would be used on a Humans to Mars program. Okay, so for example, he's developed the Dragon capsule. He has been developing the Falcon Heavy launch vehicle, which is probably going to have its first flight this year. And the heavy lift launch vehicle is the single most expensive hardware development in a program of this kind. So he's already spent private money to create the systems, or some of the systems, that will be needed for the mission. So if NASA was at this point to say Humans to Mars, many of the pieces that they're going to need to do it have already been developed in significant part by private money. So it will be a public-private partnership. And because you now have this. And it will be an international partnership, because I believe that the Europeans and Japanese and Canadians, at least, and possibly other countries as well, would join us in this endeavor.
Do you think a first step would be to, first off, build on the moon as a jump-off point for Mars? It seems to me that the orbital trajectories, if you start at the moon, it makes it, first off, you don't have quite as much, you don't need as much propellant to start with. So that leaves you more room for radiation shielding and water and different things, because it seems like one of the obstacles to going to Mars is the length of time, the radiation, and the amount of supplies you would need. So do we need to do it in a stepwise, or just straight to Mars?
I believe that we can do the moon and Mars in parallel. You would not launch to Mars from the moon. It is true that it is easier to launch to Mars from the moon than from Earth, but anything, in order to launch it from the moon, it has to get to the moon. It means it has to come from Earth. And so you're actually not saving anything by doing that. But a launch a space transportation system that can send people to Mars can also send people to the moon, and it's advantageous to do them in parallel because we can only go to Mars every other year. That is, the planetary alignments are only right to go to Mars every other year. So, it costs almost as much to have a launch system sitting around doing nothing as it costs to use it. So that it would just be a tremendous waste of money to do Mars and not do the moon. And similarly, to go to the moon and not go to Mars would be selling ourselves short. So I do not believe we need to go to the moon to go to Mars. I do not believe that we go to the moon in order to launch to Mars. But I do think that a Mars program would really just not be a Mars alone program, but it would be Moon and Mars in parallel. But just like, when we did Apollo and we had the Saturn V, we were able to launch a space station in an afternoon. It was called Skylab. We didn't need a space station to go to the moon. There were people at that time who argued that we did, but we didn't. And we went to the moon without using a space station to go to the moon. But the fact that we had a system that could get us to the moon also enabled us to launch space stations.
Yeah, that was one of the few things that Arthur C. Clarke didn't quite get. There's not the huge space station at the Lagrange point as a jumping off point, but so much of what he wrote. I'm actually reading his complete short stories, and as I'm going through this, it's like he was nailing things back in the 50s that have happened today. Arthur C. Clarke was so visionary. I mean, true science fiction in that it was science-based fiction, not fantasy. And a lot of the stuff he came up with, he hit it head on.
True. I agree. There's an interesting story about that, if you want to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Arthur Clarke wrote a novel called Earthlight, which was substantially about an intrigue that took place in an astronomical observatory on the moon in the crater Aristarchus. Okay? And in 1970, Apollo astronauts visited the crater Aristarchus, and they had read Earthlight. And so when they got there, one of them said, this is the crater Aristarchus, the scene of Arthur Clarke's great novel, Earthlight. Wouldn't he be proud to know, if he were alive today, to know that we have finally reached this place? Now, in fact, Arthur Clarke was alive in 1970. He only died just a few years ago. And so he heard this comment, and he said, yes, I am quite proud to know that we have finally made it to Aristarchus. But you know something? I wrote that story in 1940 when I was manning a radar station in Britain during the Blitz, and I was writing these stories at night. And if anyone had told me then that just 30 years later people would be walking around on the moon in that place, I would have thought it was the most wildest poppycock imaginable. Now just think about this. Here's the young Arthur Clarke, radar operator in England during the Battle of Britain, staying up late at night. Most of the time warfare is just waiting and boredom, so he's writing stories. Okay. And 30 years later, we're from that world, with Spitfires and Messerschmitts, to moon landings, 1940 to 1970. Now, 1970 is 47 years ago. Okay, that is, we are 1.5 times as far in the future from 1970 as 1970 was from 1940. Look how much the world changed, how much spaceflight changed from 1940 to 1970. Look how little has changed from 1970 to today. That is the failure of NASA. That is the failure of our post-Apollo leadership right there.
Do you think the public still has that faith?
Yeah, I do. I do. And, you know, when I give a talk explaining, for instance, my plans on how we could send humans to Mars to a public audience, the main question I get is, why aren't we doing this? This is the sort of thing this country ought to be doing.
A lot of people are concerned, though, in regards to the money spent, because we're talking multi-billions of dollars, if not close to the $1 trillion mark, if not over, are we not?
Not trillions, no. We're talking, depending upon how it's done, a few tens of billions. We're talking about the kind of money this country spends for some miscellaneous medium-sized military procurement for some weapon system or other that you haven't heard of. We're talking about, you know, maybe a fifth of what we spent to bail out Goldman Sachs or AIG in 2009. That is, you know, we're talking about, 3-4% of what we spent on the Iraq War. Okay, and what are we going to get out of it? Well, we're going to find out a lot of science. We're going to find out the truth about the potential prevalence and diversity of life in the universe. We're going to inspire millions of young people to go into science and engineering. You know, you want to fix education in this country, you're not going to do it by testing the kids to death. That's nonsense. But inspiring them to want to learn by offering them a chance to take part in a great adventure, that will get them to learn. And finally, what we're going to get is the future. We're going to open up the future to humanity as a spacefaring species, and we're going to make sure that we are represented in that future. You know, you and I are speaking English because the English went forth from their little island and colonized North America and created a daughter culture here. And then, of course, you know, not just the U.S., Canada, Australia, many other places around the world, English is a world language. You know, my people came from Eastern Europe. I don't have a drop of Anglo-Saxon blood in my body, but I speak English. You know, I speak a little bit of Russian, but fluent in English. I mean, it's my language, and you know, and it is the English culture with its individualism, with Shakespeare, with, you know, this is my culture. This is the culture of 300 million Americans, most of whom their people did not come from England. And, you know, if the English had not gone forth and created children, as it were, that in terms of nations, new nations descended from them, they would be like Croatia, you know, just some little place somewhere with this odd dialect that, you know, had no particular significance, and on a global scale, and the ideas of freedom and individualism and so forth that went along with that culture would remain a local curiosity in a world dominated by very different kinds of cultures that did not feature those humanistic aspects.
Dr. Zubrin, do you believe, though, that it is a one-way trip at first? Because I think that's a fear. Like, when I look at this, I think it's exciting. I think we should be going there. But the idea that we may be stranding human beings on there with a limited amount of food, with a limited allowance of proper oxygen, does that maybe cause concern on everything?
Well, look, there's risks in the mission, there's no doubt. And but, well, first of all, life is a one-way trip, okay? I think that the initial missions to Mars will be round-trip missions by design, and all of my mission designs are round-trip missions. But at some point, people will go one way to Mars because that's what settlement is. It's one way. You know, I'm really glad that my ancestors took a one-way trip from Russia to America a century ago. and that's worked out real well for me. And all of our ancestors took one-way trips to America. But initially, though, we'll go as explorers, just like Columbus did and Hudson did and so forth. But then the settlers will go.
So when we finally get to that point where we can launch these rockets up towards Mars, are we sending a team of rockets, or are we sending just one that is man-made at this time? What do you think we need to do?
Well, that's an interesting idea. Look, we can do expeditions with a single rocket. We could talk about mission design in a minute, but we could go in one ship. Obviously, you're safer if you go in two ships so that one can back the other up, or three or four. I think that perhaps the best way to do international collaboration on a mission like this is to have various players each send their own ship. So we could have an American ship, a European ship, perhaps a Russian ship, a Chinese ship, Japanese ship, Indian ship. So we have 6 ships. And then if one of these countries decides to drop out of the program, instead of having 6 ships, we'll have 5 ships. But we don't want to make it a thing like the space station, where if any one country drops out, all of a sudden a certain critical system is no longer available. In other words, we don't. And also, for instance, you take, for instance, the Russians, who could certainly participate in a mission of this kind. Given the tensions that there are, you don't want to be cooperating on building the same ship and sharing technology. But nevertheless, we can each go in our own ship and be there to rescue the other and share scientific information about Mars and stuff like this, which does not have military significance, but, we can compete on who can do the most to advance human knowledge about Mars and advance the human frontier on Mars. A friendly Olympic-style competition, and this, I think, could be a productive way to create friendship between nations who are otherwise at odds.
Dr. Zubrin, if we go there, and hopefully I'll see it in my lifetime, if not mine, at least maybe my grandkids will see it. Could we, and this is a question that a friend of mine on the chat room, is the Spreaker chat, is asking, how about we use our automated devices instead of just a Mars rover, maybe a robotic assembly, some kind of remote operated vehicle to at least get the foundations laid up? Would that even be feasible?
Yeah, to some extent, certainly. Okay. Look, robotics is advancing. We have these rovers on Mars now. And we're going to have better rovers on Mars as the years go by with onboard artificial intelligence. Not robots, like Terminators and things, but nevertheless, machines that you can send there that you don't have to tell them, drive 2 feet this way, drive 2 feet that way, there's a rock, turn to the left, go around it. You just say, I want you to get to the top of that hill, and it figures out how to do that, okay? Just like if you were telling someone to go shopping for you, you don't dictate where they put their foot on every step of the way to the supermarket. You just say, I need you to go to the supermarket and buy me a bag of carrots. And they can figure out how to do that. It certainly would help to have installations set up on Mars in advance of the crew. In my mission plan, which is known as the Mars Direct Plan, and which is outlined at depth in a book that I've written called The Case for Mars, which people can get from Amazon or elsewhere, we do the mission with 2 ships. The first one is the Earth Return Vehicle, and that goes to Mars with no one in it. And it lands on Mars, and it deploys a small nuclear power source a few hundred yards away from the ship, which provides power, and then it runs a pump. It sucks in the Martian air, which is mostly carbon dioxide, reacts that with some hydrogen you brought from Earth to produce a large supply of methane and oxygen, rocket fuel, and oxidizer. Now you have a fully fueled Earth return vehicle sitting waiting for you on Mars, and then you send the crew out, and it goes there. They land their habitat near the Earth return vehicle. That's their house on Mars. And then when they want to come home, they get in the Earth return vehicle and fly back. They leave their hab behind on Mars. So each time you do this, you add another habitat to the base. And pretty soon you've got a settlement built. But certainly, sending the Earth return vehicle, deploying its reactor, we could maybe inflate greenhouses and get them going before the crew arrives, so you're actually growing food before the people even get there. There's lots of stuff like this you could do. When the Mormons went west in the 1840s, the way they would do it is they would send a group ahead, and as they went west, they would plant fields of corn or other crops, and then they would move on, and the next group that came up would harvest those fields, okay, so that they would have food growing for them along the way. Now, of course, those were not robots, those were people, but if you could imagine sending robots ahead to establish a greenhouse and get some crops growing, that's a big advantage to have your food already grown for you when you get there instead of having to plant the crops and wait for it to grow. It also reduces risk.
Doctor, I got a couple questions from our audience, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
As we always like to include them in the conversation. This one comes from Everett. And Everett is saying, Dr. Zubrin, do you think that a manned Mars mission should take place before missions to begin terraforming the planet take place first?
Yes, I do. Terraforming is further in the future. It's much easier to visit a planet than to change a planet. And, terraforming is a big job. And frankly, even though people in the future are going to have much more advanced technologies, they're going to be much richer than we are, it'll still be a big job. And I think the only people that will be motivated enough to spend that much effort and resources and money to terraform the planet are people that actually live there, because they're going to be the ones who benefit the most from it, because they will take their planet and turn it from a desert into a living world. And so the sequence is, first we send explorers, then we send settlers, and then the settlers terraform the planet.
And this one comes on Twitter, at hashtag Spaced Out Radio, from Canadian Joe. He is asking, Doctor, in your opinion, how long after colonization will native-born Martians feel no more loyalty to Earth?
Oh, I would say about as soon as they're born. I mean, people are, look out for themselves. And people are, people can have some loyalty to others and feel friendship to others, but the Martians are not going to want to be the instruments of people on Earth. They're going to want to develop their own society. This, we saw that here in this country. The first settlers were sent over by, the British West India Company or other such organizations with the idea that they would create profitable outposts for these investors in England. And it didn't take long at all before the people that came over here, they weren't there to make profits for investors in England. They weren't there to make lives for themselves. And certainly their children had no interest in making profits for investors. And, they weren't there thinking of, are we going to let the stockholders down by, doing something other than what they want? No, they're there developing their own societies. And, and I can easily envision something like this. You might have some bureaucratic authorities on Earth, say NASA, or maybe some international space research organization, whatever consortiums put together, and they send people to Mars, for example, to explore, for science. And the first people that go there, they're dedicated science, and they're there to do that. But if they're there for a while and they become lifers and they start setting up relationships, they'll start having children. And, well, even right there, you'd probably have the authorities on Earth saying, why are you having children? They are a distraction from your job for exploration. But they're saying we're having children because we want to have children. We want to have families. And then the children themselves, are definitely going to be thinking about making life better on Mars rather than fulfill any mandate from Earth.
I just want to know if there's going to be Earth bars on Mars, much like there's Mars bars on Earth. That's what I want to know.
What I would recommend is that you trademark it now.
That would be kind of cool. That would be actually really kind of cool. We only got about 90 seconds left for you, and we got time to squeeze in this question from Mark at #SpacedOutRadio. He's saying, since Mars has a weak atmosphere, would it not get beat up a lot more by meteors and space junk? Dangerous place to live, maybe?
Well, a little more, yeah. Now, the Mars atmosphere, as thin as it is thick enough to burn up micrometeorites, which are the vast majority of meteorites. The vast majority of meteors that hit the Earth are, like the size of grains of sand, and they burn up in our upper atmosphere. So those kinds of things that, you see when you see shooting stars, those would also burn up on Mars. They burn up a little closer to the ground. They'd probably look more impressive, but they would still burn up before they hit the ground. Big ones, they would still hit the ground just as they do on Earth, but we don't get hit that often. So, and actually, Earth probably would get hit more often than Mars because it's got stronger gravity. It has more pull to bring in meteors. So I wouldn't say a significant danger to Martians is meteor hits. I would say the main danger is that until we terraform the planet, you're going outside wearing a spacesuit, and the spacesuit malfunctions, you're in trouble.
And on that note, we're going to hop out for our first break of the night. We got one more hour left with Dr. Robert Zubrin. We're talking Colonizing Mars on Spaced Out Radio with myself, Dave Scott, and Eric Markham. We'll be right back after this.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
Looking for news beyond the mainstream news? Head to spacedoutradio.com and check out the SOR Spacewire. This is Spaced Out Radio's Eric Markham, News Director for the SOR Spacewire. Daily, I will bring you intriguing stories and outlandish reports from what's going on around the world. UFO sightings, paranormal activity, conspiracies, alternative health, and so much more. And if you have news, email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Have you got your Cosmic Passport? If you need one, tune in to Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Weekend. This is Elizabeth Anglin, ET experiencer, spirit medium, and host of Cosmic Passport. Each weekend I'll be bringing you interviews and support from other paranormal experiencers, and the best in intuitive spiritual guidance from across the globe. It's all happening starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight Eastern, on spacedoutradio.com.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest, from Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness, you can come hang out with me, James Tyson, in Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up. Enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio Live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to Space Out Radio. Tonight, I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the show, all the way from Australia, intuitive Heidi Jane will join us. She's pretty much a national star down there for her psychic abilities and teaching intuition. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, 3 p.m. AEDT. If you're listening in Aussieville, like I know Andrew, Steve, and Robert are listening in right now. Thank you, our Aussie contingent. Appreciate that. We want to thank everyone listening in on the United Public Radio Network live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. Good to have you along for the ride. And we also want to thank everyone listening live in Sin City. Yes, right from Las Vegas. Renegade Talk Radio. Blasting away Space Out Radio right now. Thank you for being with us. And of course, if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Bothrio Sedaris is your password. Make sure you use it wisely. Bothrio Sedaris is your password, and you know what to do with it if you are a space traveler. If you want to follow us on social media, you could do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. Download this show and others on iTunes. Tune us in on TuneIn. We have our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show, that holds our archives as well. And, of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. It has a plethora of features for you. including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for just $5 a month. Tonight we are talking with Dr. Robert Zubrin. He is one of the premier leaders in Mars research. Should we go to Mars? Should we not? His website, marssociety.org. Doctor, welcome back.
Thank you.
And Eric, welcome back. We have Eric Markham co-hosting with me tonight.
Thank you, Dave.
Doc, I don't want to get too much into the whole conspiracy side that surrounds Mars, but with someone with your expertise on this planet, there's a lot of people out there who believe that A, we've either already been there, or B, there's a lost colony that was wiped out there. Do you ever look into that type of history on Mars to see if it's actually real?
No. But I have to tell you, I have looked into the history that we should have been on Mars. I have seen the plans that NASA had in 1969 to get us to Mars by 1981, and these plans were entirely feasible. And, I mean, one could write an alternate history on the world that could have been and should have been. And I guess I'm kind of like someone who's trying to get us back on the right history timeline right now. Like, there's this show, The Man in the High Castle, about a world where the Nazis won World War II, but there seems to be information leaking into it about another world where the Americans won World War II, and the resistance is trying to get us back into this timeline. And, well, that's kind of like where we are today. We're living in the bad timeline as far as space exploration is concerned. There was another timeline. There was another history that could have happened than the one that did happen. And we have to get back into that one.
Question from Bill in the SOR Space Travelers Club. He is asking, Dr. Zubrin, is there any plans, as far as you know, to mine Mars? And what do you think the type of mineral composition is up there that we could use?
Well, Mars has pretty much all the different elements that we have on Earth, and it's had a complex geological history with volcanism and water action, and possibly even biological action, and that these are the kinds of things that create concentrated mineral ores. And, of course, Mars has not been mined by people for thousands of years in the way that Earth has, where all the easy-to-find gold has been found by, ancient or medieval people, leaving us to have to, really process it out of rocks and stuff. So, sure, we can mine Mars, and Martian settlers will mine Mars for all the different industrial elements that they need. Now, could there be things on Mars, like gold and so forth? Yes. Could it be easier to find than it currently is on Earth? Yes, because of the fact that people haven't been, scouring the place for ages. Could the stuff be exported to Earth for sale, for profit? Possibly. It depends on the cost of space transportation. If we had reusable spaceships, so we not paying a fortune each time we fly, then possibly yes. One thing we know that exists on Mars at 6 times the amount that it exists on Earth is deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen, which is the ideal fuel for fusion reactors. It's 6 times more prevalent on Mars than it is on Earth. And it conceivably could be very valuable in a future world in which people have fusion power, which I do think we will have. So, yeah, there are things that could be mined on Mars for both use by the Martians and export by the Martians.
So we'll probably end up having to get in bed with the Germans if we explore Mars, because they're the first to actually, seems like they're the first ones to actually get a working fusion reactor going. So that if they're smart, they'll license all of that and you're not going to use their technology without paying them. It seems to me that... Go ahead.
Go on. No, I just think that... No, that you're talking about that Stellarator in Germany. It's an interesting machine. But there are other approaches, and there are some private entrepreneurial companies that are working on fusion right now. We'll see who has it. But, patents only last for 18 years. Whoever gets it first, a generation later, it's all public knowledge.
Once we do get there, okay, like I said, with the conspiracy side of things, that there was a civilization there, are we going to face, if they get there and it's just a barren rock, the rest of the face on Mars and the arcologies is just pareidolia, is that going to lessen some of the enthusiasm for it's like, oh, we got here and it's just a dead rock, bummer? Or will something else take its place and make the enthusiasm, redirect the enthusiasm?
Well, sure, because once we're there, it won't be a barren rock. It'll be a living world. It'll be a world with cities and universities and used bookstores and community theater, and everything that a place has. And it will be a world that is filled with many technologically adept people that will be doing all kinds of inventions in order to make Mars a more habitable planet. And by the way, those patents will definitely be exportable and be part of the way that Mars finances itself. Mars will be what the Martians make of it. People think that there's such a thing as natural resources. I don't. I think there's only natural raw materials. I think it's human ingenuity that turns raw materials into resources. For instance, land. Land was not a resource until we invented agriculture. Oil was not a resource till we developed oil drilling. Uranium wasn't a resource till we developed nuclear power. People create resources. Mars will have resources once people are there, because it is people who are resourceful. And so I don't think the face on Mars is there's a rock formation there that looks like a face, but I don't think it's a sculpture. But there are natural wonders on Mars as far as that is concerned. There's incredible scenery on Mars. In fact, there's a satellite in orbit around Mars right now called the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and there's an instrument on it called the HiRISE telescope. It's a very high-resolution telescope that's on this satellite, and they're taking all these pictures and they're publishing them. You can go on Twitter, you see them, these incredible photographs that these guys are publishing every day of there's spectacular scenery on Mars as far as that is concerned. But the real thing that makes a place interesting, at least to me, is its people and its culture and its history, and there'll be plenty of that on Mars. Mars is filled with history that's waiting to be made.
So actually, with, what is it, about 1/5 Earth gravity, as people...
1/3.
1/3? So you're going to have some biological changes as people evolve on Mars. They're eventually going to get to where they wouldn't be able to come back to the home planet under full gravity anyway. It would just be crushing.
Well, they'd have to certainly work out and make themselves fit for it. They will wonder why anybody ever wanted to live on this planet where the gravity is so heavy. Just like, it's a pale example, but I'm originally from the East Coast, but I live in Colorado now, and whenever I go to a place that's at sea level, I don't really feel that comfortable sleeping at night and so forth. The air is kind of thick, but you get used to new things, and you wonder why people ever put up with what you used to find natural.
Well, actually, if we colonize Mars, that's going to open up a whole new world of medicine. because we're at 1/3. So the changes to the human body, plus, how do our terrestrial medicines work on Mars? The pharmacokinetics are going to be different. There's I think we need to get there just to open up the sciences all the way around, because everything we take for granted on Earth might not apply on Mars.
Well, it'll be different. But also, I would have to say, one thing that's pretty obvious is that old people who find it difficult to get around on Earth will greatly benefit from moving to Mars.
As we migrate, I notice in just on Earth, when a country develops very good education, but there's no jobs for these people that have been educated to do, we end up with a brain drain. Would we have to worry about that, since you just can't hop in a car and go to Mars or hop on an airplane? Would that be regulated, or do you think, we're going to send our best and brightest there to tip the odds in our favor for success?
Well, I think the best and brightest will take themselves to Mars. Because, you only live once, and if you really want to do something that makes a difference, you want to go to a place where people are building a new world instead of just living in one that's already been made. And, I think that America got a lot of its dynamism from that. Not just people, certainly people would get up and go to seek a better life for themselves, but also people wanting to be part of this fantastic, great project of creating a new world. And so it won't be a matter of sending our best and brightest. No one's going to be drafted to go to Mars. But people who are driven and want to make a difference and think they can, or people who simply are not willing to accept the limits of the world, which has already been made, and they'll go to Mars. I think Mars will be the new America.
What kind of frontier? Dr. Zubrin, what kind of seeds would we have to bring to try and produce food on Mars?
Well, I think we should bring a very large variety of seeds, to find which can grow best in Martian soils. And probably once we have them there, there'll be some that can kind of grow but not that well. But once again, you start doing selective breeding, and you'll breed new strains of crops that are better adapted for those soils. And also, who knows exactly how Martian gravity is going to affect plants, but there'll be selection. There'll be random mutation, and then those strains that do best, they'll prevail, and we will get plant species, animal species, and ultimately people who are better adapted for Martian conditions. That's how it works.
On Twitter at #SpaceOutRadio, John is asking, how many generations would it take, in your opinion, for humans to fully adapt to Mars's gravity?
That's an interesting question. Well, fully adapt, a lot. But I think that you'll start seeing partial adaptation in the very first generation born there.
So you don't think it'll take too long at all in regards to this?
Well, no. I think you'll start seeing partial adaptation in the first generation. Not. In other words, look. There's genetic changes, and they take a long period of time. But there's also physical changes, and basically, where your own body has a certain capacity to adjust for new conditions, and certainly if you're born and raised on Mars, then it will. And let me give you a trivial example. Okay, when the astronauts went to the moon, where the gravity is 1/6 that of the Earth, they found that an efficient way to walk was this sort of bouncing walk that they managed to develop. In other words, in just a few hours on the moon, they figured out this new kind of shuffle, a new kind of skipping walk became the natural way to walk on the moon. All right. Now, of course, in those few hours there, they probably didn't really get that skip down pat. In other words, they were learning a new dance and they were just learning it. But if they had stayed there a month or a year, that would have become the completely natural way for them to walk. Just like sailors getting used to walking around on a rocking ship deck, okay, and then actually feel a little wobbly when they're on the dock. In other words, they have mastered the art of walking on a rocking ship, and then steady land doesn't feel quite right to them, at least not for a while. And similarly on the moon. Well, the people who are born on Mars, they will grow up with that, the ideal way of walking on Mars right from the get-go. They will have to learn a different way to walk if they go to Earth. Just putting aside the fact that the gravity is heavier, it's just different. Because, for instance, the amount of time you spend off the ground as you take a step is different. There's a different rhythm to it. And certainly the astronauts found this on the moon. So the people who go to Mars will, or who grow up on Mars they will be partially adapted to those conditions. They will, they'll have a different walk. Now, also, I'm taller than my father. Was taller than his father. Okay, we've all seen this in generations that came to America, where, for instance, Americans ate a lot more meat than Europeans did. Okay, so this was not a genetic change. We have pretty much the same gene pool we came to this country with, but nutrition was different here, and you combine nutrition with exercise and other things, you start to see some physiological changes. Okay, and also, once again, if you're taller, you have a different walk than if you're shorter. And Americans, they actually have a different teeth structure than Europeans because of the greater amount of calcium in their diets. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if Martians, one generation in, have a certain stereotypical walk, a certain stereotypical look that you could probably, you wouldn't be right all the time, but looking at a person born on Mars, you might be able to guess they were born on Mars, just looking at them.
One more question here from our audience, if you don't mind. This one comes from Trip. Since Mars gravity is different, is little simple life things like cooking going to be more difficult as it is at high altitudes here on Earth?
Well, it'll be different. You'll have to get used to it. You probably don't want to turn the heat up on the stove quite as much because the bubbles will fly higher up, for example. But it won't be as different as zero-G. Okay, I once asked Buzz Aldrin, who, of course, spent most of his life on Earth, spent some time in Earth orbit in zero gravity and a little bit of time on the moon. On the moon, where you had 1/6 gravity, was that more like being on Earth or like being in space in zero G? And he said, oh, it was much more like being on Earth. Because there was an up and a down. If you put a coffee cup on the table, it would stay there, and the liquid in it would stay in the cup. And it wasn't like zero G. So even though that was only 1/6 gravity, things stay where they're supposed to be. But sure, it's a little different, and you would have to get used to it. But for a lot of things, having low gravity would certainly make things easier. I mean, just moving things around, everything's going to be lighter.
We would also have to adapt to the Martian diurnal cycle. I mean, a 24-hour day, 7-day week, what we 365-day year from Earth is not going to translate to Mars.
Well, it translates pretty good. The Martian day is only 24 hours, 39 minutes long. That's not that different from Earth. It's not like the moon where it's 2 weeks of light and 2 weeks of dark. I mean, it's pretty close. Now, the year is twice as long. That's a substantial difference. So the seasons are twice as long, but the day is similar.
So the tide wouldn't throw our circadian rhythms off that much if we were there.
No, not much at all.
Okay, good. I thought Dave was going to step in here. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Eric.
Okay. Once we get there, okay, the commercial application of the gear that's needed, they're going to have to start building it themselves in order to be cost effective. So unfortunately, we have to take our industrial capabilities with us. And we've seen what that can do to this planet. You think there's going to be an EPA version, a Martian EPA, or some kind of way to protect that environment? I mean, we're trying to make it a better place.
Well, look, okay. You're definitely going to want to do things in an organized way. I mean, putting aside EPAs and such, people on Earth had to learn that if you're going to dump sewage in the river, you do it downstream of where you get your drinking water. Okay? And then they learned to treat the sewage so it wouldn't have that much impact on the river at all. Okay? But so similarly, you don't want to have, slag from making iron just lying around all over the place. You want to put that in just a special place for junk, okay? So you want to do things in an organized way. On the other hand, you don't want to have something like the EPA, which goes around making rules for every damn thing without rhyme or reason, just to be able to be in charge of everything, and makes people get a permit to drain a puddle on their farm because, prove to me this isn't a natural wetland or something. I mean, but sure, we do want to have common sense rules to not make a total mess of things.
So we're going to have to import, or the initial colonies on Mars are going to be strictly importing stuff. So where would be?
No, we're going to. No, I think we will. We'll make fuel on Mars. We're going to make oxygen on Mars out of CO2. We're going to grow plants on Mars. We're going to extract water from the Martian soil. And so those are some of the early things. Then probably the next thing we'll make on Mars, aside from things that you can make from plants like fabrics, is iron and steel. Mars is red because the soil is extremely rich in iron. So steel making on Mars will be the first industry. And of course, once you have steel, you can make all kinds of things. So food, water, clothing, fuel, steel, plastics you can also make on Mars. Once you grow plants, you can have wood as well. Cotton, as well as artificial fabrics. These are things that people can make on Mars. Things that will take longer to make on Mars are things that require a large division of labor, like computer circuit boards and stuff. So for a while, we're going to have to import that kind of stuff from Earth. But one thing that's very promising is 3D printing, which things that used to take a whole machine shop to make, now you can make, provided you have the raw material and a 3D printer. And this will greatly help the Martians. But what you want to do is, as soon as you can, make things that are relatively simple but are massive, such as what I've mentioned. Because if you can make it on Mars, you don't have to drag it out from Earth. That'll save a lot of money.
So we're going to have to spend a great deal of time. How many generations do you think it's going to take to set up a Martian infrastructure where we have the manufacturing and the transportation?
Well, we're going to set up some infrastructure starting on the very first mission. As I said, we're going to set up a fuel and oxygen making facility. We will set up greenhouses, inflatable greenhouses. We'll extract water from the soil, things like that. But a fully developed industrial society will take generations.
How many people do you think will need to go on the first part of colonization?
Well, the first exploration missions will be 4, 5, 6 people. But then, once they establish the place for the base and set up the first greenhouses, then we'll start sending tens of people to Mars. So that maybe 20 years after the first landing, there's 50 people living on Mars in a small base. And that gives you a pretty wide range of skills if you choose the people right. To develop a true society, well, you need hundreds of thousands of people. America at the time of independence was about 4 million people. I think that society of a few million people is what you need to have a fully developed culture. But, it will, it'll take some time.
Do you think the initial... Go ahead, Dave.
Do you think it should be a fair mixture of men versus women on that panel?
Well...
And would you start... And when I asked that, would you start, looking into this? Because obviously up on the space station, they have not allowed men and women to have sex in order to see how sex is up in space. I'm wondering, would that be allowed up on Mars?
Whether it's allowed or not, it's going to happen.
Yes.
All right, you can count on that. That's one you can take to the bank. But ultimately, it's not really something that is going to happen because people are people. It's going to happen. It must happen because it's part of the program. If you want to create a Martian civilization, you got to have children. Right. That's what it's all about, man. Initially, the pattern we've seen on Earth is that typically first landing situations might be more men than women. There's reason for that. But once you get into a settlement phase, you definitely want to have roughly equal numbers of men and women. And certainly you will, once children are born, they will be 50-50 or close to it. The British prevailed in North America over the French because the British sent women as well as men. In the French Canada, almost all the immigrants were male. And so despite the fact that France had a much larger population than England at that time, about 4 times as large, by the time the French and Indian War broke out in the 1750s, there were 2 million English-speaking colonists in North America and only 50,000 French, which basically predetermined the outcome. You might say that the battle between the British and French in North America was won in the sewing circles of Bristol when British women were willing to come to America and the French were not.
Question from our chat room on Spreaker from Trip. He is asking, where would you suggest would be the best place to set any type of Earth base up or human base up on Mars?
Well, I would go for low latitudes, that is the Martian tropics, because Mars is pretty cold, and so you want to be in the warmer parts of the planet. There's an argument to be made for mid-latitudes, like 40 north, because there are larger amounts of water in the soil and water ice available there. So I could consider that, but not further north or south than say, 40 degrees. I'd want low altitude. Mars has varied topography. I'd want to go for the lowlands, once again, because first of all, there's more water. The air is thicker, which is an advantage because Martian air is thin. It's easier to, acquire the thicker air with pumps and such to make fuel and oxygen out of it. It also provides better radiation shielding and, as you brought up, micrometeorite shielding. I would try to find a place there where there is geothermal power available. Mars is geologically active. You want to find a place where there's hot stuff close to the surface because then you could create geothermal power by drilling down into it. And it might also provide you with water. And it also might be of great scientific interest because if there's life on Mars today, the most probable place is geothermally heated underground chambers or hydrothermal vents and things of this sort.
Gail is wondering if it would be conducive for us to be building, if we haven't already, some sort of hybrid Mars bubble here on Earth to see what would grow there, what life would be like, to kind of take what's up there or what we expect to be up here, produce it down here to see if we'd be able to thrive. What is your opinion?
Well, that's a good idea. The Mars Society, which is a nonprofit that I lead, actually has created a simulated Mars base in the desert in Utah, and we have a crew there right now. In fact, they're from Czechoslovakia, I think. And we have crews from all nations and mixed crews and so forth go there. They're mostly practicing field exploration under Mars mission type conditions. But we're setting up a greenhouse there, laboratories, all sorts of stuff. But certainly practicing a Mars mission on Earth is a very good idea.
Do you think that there would be any sort of want for a lot of people to go? Because when this whole Mars exploration, this one-way trip that was going on over the last couple of years where they were taking names of people, they were getting thousands of inquiries of people who wanted to head up to be the first part of colonization on Mars. Do you think that people are going to be the first, because we're going to have to bring engineers, we're going to have to bring construction workers, people who can build, to get the physical dimensions of everything built at first, do we not?
Sure. Well, yeah, no, Mars One, which said that they were going to send people to Mars one way on settlement missions, got thousands and thousands of volunteers, many of whom were not qualified, but many of whom were. They had engineers and all sorts of people, agronomists, farmers, doctors, all sorts of people that could be mechanics, very handy on Mars. And I don't think there'd be any shortage of people who want to go.
Sign me up. I would love it. I was wondering, though, this is going to bring out, once we get there, there's going to become jobs and careers and science that we can't even imagine right now. I mean, is that going to become, that could become an attraction to Mars? Their university system could end up being one of the biggest draws. People going to get their PhDs on Mars because the science is just wide open there.
Well, perhaps. I think the big draw is going to be a place we can go where you can really put your science and intelligence to work. I mean, one thing that's pretty clear is what is going to be on Mars is going to be a labor shortage. Okay? And we saw this in the frontier on Earth. And in fact, this is why people came here from Europe. Well, first of all, when you have a place with a labor shortage, number one, pay is higher. Okay? That goes without saying. Number two, there's going to be less red tape imposed to get in your way. In Europe, in the 19th century, if you wanted to make a shoe, you had to be a member of the guild. Okay? Here, if you want to make a shoe, there are people who need shoes. You know how to make a shoe, just make the damn shoe, okay? In fact, you've thought of a way to make a factory for making shoes that will make thousands of shoes, cheap, even though that's not the way the guild does it, fine. We just need those shoes, okay? So what you get at the frontier is pragmatism, and pragmatism is liberating. It says, if you can do it, do it, okay? As America has moved away from the frontier and we've become more bureaucratized, we create layers and layers of credentials that people are supposed to have before they're allowed to do anything. Right now, I mean, I just read this story about there's some state where women who want to be hairdressers have to take a 2-year class to get the certificate. In other words, we are oppressing ourselves by creating barriers for people to use their own human potential. That is the opposite of the frontier mentality. So in the frontier, if you can do it, do it. People who find themselves limited in what they're allowed to do are going to want to go to Mars, because they have faith in themselves and know they can do something, and they're going to want to go to a place where people let them do what they can.
So it's going to be in a way, it's going to be the technological Wild West, because you're going to have all these innovative people that find all of a sudden they're not trammeled anymore. But that could also, for every good thing, there's going to be bad things. So you're going to have the people that go there that come up with evil stuff. How will we regulate?
Well,
I hate to see Mars become another Earth.
Well, but that's the double-edged sword, which is known as freedom, right?
Right.
If you let people be free, they will do good things and they will do bad things. But on the whole, I think the average person does more good than bad, that people create more than they destroy on the average. Because if that was not true, there'd be nothing here. There'd be no houses, there'd be no cities, there'd be no civilization if the average person destroyed more than they created. So if you make people free, they will create more. And, you know, this is why the freest countries on earth are the richest countries on earth and the happiest countries on earth. Okay, even though there is the potential for evil in a free society, there's just so much more potential for good.
Now, does Mars is geologically active, so does it have a heavy nickel iron plasma core like Earth, or have they actually figured out what's at the core of Mars?
Well, they don't know completely, but Mars probably does have metallic core like Earth does, yeah.
Okay. It doesn't have a magnetosphere, though.
No, it doesn't have a magnetosphere. It has local magnetic fields that are pretty weak. The Mars core may have solidified because being about half the size of the Earth in terms of diameter, the heat could leak out of it sooner than the Earth. But it doesn't have much of a magnetic field, no.
So there's nothing to really, without an atmosphere and without a magnetosphere, the solar wind and some of the things that Earth is protected from. Is Mars going to be, I mean, are people on Mars going to have to live underground to keep away from the radiation?
I don't think so. There are some people that say that, but I disagree, and I know a fair amount about this subject of radiation health. The Mars atmosphere, as thin as it is thick enough to mostly mask out solar flares. It's not thick enough to mask out cosmic rays very well. So there will be, so while you're not going to be threatened with a big dose of radiation from a big solar storm, that will be masked out by the Martian atmosphere. But the constant pitter-patter of radiation of the cosmic rays, they'll be there. But see, a lot of the radiation health regulations that we have are based on the hypothesis that if a lot of radiation will kill you, a little radiation might kill you, and radiation is never good for you. Okay, this is what's known as the linear no-threshold hypothesis. That is, if 1,000 rems of radiation kills you, then 100 rems has a 10% chance of killing you, and 10 rems has a 1% chance of killing you, and 1 rem has a 0.1% chance of killing you. That's how they view it, but that is not actually true. Because, I mean, look, if you drank a glass of wine a night for a year, it wouldn't hurt you at all. If you drank 365 glasses of wine in one night, it would kill you. Okay? So, in toxicology, the rate at which you receive a dose is critical issue. I mean, frankly, 365 apples, if you ate them in a night, would kill you. Okay? So, and in fact, but an apple a day is good for you. Right? No doubt about it. So, there's actually significant evidence that low radiation levels are also good for you. It's just like, people who never go outside, they look unhealthy, right? Okay. That's because they're not getting ultraviolet radiation from the sun, which is necessary to stimulate the production of vitamin D in the body. And so now, while a great deal of ultraviolet is bad for you, a little bit is necessary. And it seems to be also true with ionizing radiation. So that these low radiation levels that would be experienced by Martian colonists on the surface are not necessarily certainly not fatal, and they're not necessarily even harmful. It remains to be seen if they would be helpful to health. Very low doses of radiation clearly are helpful to health. So this is a phenomenon which is known in the radiation health community as hormesis. If people listening to the show want to look into it, they can look on the internet for hormesis, Hormesis. How low levels of radiation are not harmful. They are helpful. Now, as the radiation doses increases, then they certainly move over into being harmful.
It's dose over time. I worked on a nuclear aircraft carrier and had to have a little belt dosimeter with me everywhere I went. I had a X-ray tech I used to work with, and I asked him about, was he worried about the constant radiation from his X-ray machine? And he brought up, like you said, that there was actually a study, I believe it was an island nation that had a low constant ionizing radiation field on it, and the people were healthier and lived longer than people that weren't getting the same dose of radiation.
Right. Yeah, there's been quite a few studies of this nature. So this is surprising to people because it's not how the regulatory structure is based. But scientifically, it is accurate.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's from the holdover from the nuclear age is radiation bad. Yeah, the whole, everybody doesn't realize that radiation is everywhere around us. Neutrinos are zipping through our body by the billions as we sit here. And it's probably, it's just not the boogeyman that large doses like Hiroshima are bad, but it's manageable, and, the cumulative effect, if you don't take a bunch at one time, isn't necessarily fatal. Do you still, though, as far as for protection and for ease of structure, do you think building underground in Mars would have its advantages?
Yeah, sure. There's no question. And if you do have underground structures, then you're in a position to moderate the amount of radiation to be exactly the right amount. That is, you might spend, say, a third of your time in structures on the surface and 2/3 below, and that would cut the radiation dose by a factor of 3, so that if the surface dose was a bit more than optimal, we could regulate it down that way. And just to create additional pressurized space, if you've ever lived in a city that has a subway system, you know that you can have basically vast areas underground that people can, they work there, they shop there, they go around there. It's not like living in a tuna can.
Now, I know on the moon we put seismic sensors up there, and they were monitored for years, and it's through very valiant efforts of a few scientists that these records are being recovered. Has anything like that been put on Mars yet? Do we have an idea of the seismic activity on Mars?
A little bit. There were seismic sensors on the Viking landers, and they produced some data. There was one on Pathfinder. I don't think it worked very well. But Mars is not seismically dead. That is certainly something we know. It's not as lively as the Earth, but it's not as dead as the Moon. Okay? And, there are volcanoes on Mars, and these volcanoes are a few 100 million years old. Now, that may seem like a long time ago, but that's only 10% of the age of the planet in the past, because the planet's 4 billion years old. So if these volcanoes are 200 million years old, then it's only 5% of the age of the planet. So there was enough, how can I put it, geological oomph in the planet to create those volcanoes fairly recently. There's also been detected methane on Mars, and that methane is either being produced biologically or it's being produced by hydrothermal sources, which is once again supports the probability that there's geothermal power on Mars and hydrothermal vents and this kind of stuff, which could be a major resource to Martian settlers and of great interest to Martian scientists.
How long do you think the timeline is to actually start a launch?
Well, that's a question of decision. We could be on Mars in 8 years. If Trump really wants to make America great again, he should declare humans to Mars by the end of the second term, and we can do it. On the other hand, if no one decides to do it, it could take forever. Okay? It'll happen when we decide to make it happen. But from a technical point of view, we're about 8 years out.
Well, do we have, and we only got about 90 seconds left with you tonight, Dr. Zubrin, do you think we have the technology to get there?
Absolutely. From a technical point of view, we are much better prepared today to send humans to Mars than we were to send men to the moon in 1961 when Kennedy started the moon program, and we were there 8 years later. Given the will, given the courage, given the vision, we could be on Mars within a decade.
Doctor, we got about 30 seconds with you. I want to say thank you, Dr. Zubrin, for being a guest with us tonight to talk about colonizing Mars, the last 2 hours of this show. Where can people find more information about your website, marssociety.org?
Okay, well, the Mars Society has a website at marssociety.org. And I've got a book called The Case for Mars, which is available on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Zubrin, for being on Spaced Out Radio tonight. And I hope one day we actually get to see the launch of a spacecraft, manned spacecraft to Mars. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think so too. And by the way, if they go to the Mars Society website, they'll see Mars Society is having its next international convention in University of California, Irvine in September. And it's open to the public. You can come to the conference and hear lots of talks about this kind of stuff.
Excellent, Doctor. Thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio. Hour number 3 with Triple E, Everett, Eric, and Eric. Right after this, you're listening to Spaced Out Radio. We'll be right back.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Have you got your Cosmic Passport? If you need one, tune in to Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Weekend. This is Elizabeth Anglin, ET experiencer, spirit medium, and host of Cosmic Passport. Each weekend I'll be bringing you interviews and support from other paranormal experiencers, and the best in intuitive spiritual guidance from across the globe. It's all happening starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight Eastern, on spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4COP. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you checked out the SOR Spacewire at spacedoutradio.com yet? Every day we post the latest stories regarding the weird, strange, and completely unbelievable. From cryptid and UFO sightings to the conspiracy world, we tackle it all. Hi there, I'm Eric Markham, Spaced Out Radio's news director for the SOR Spacewire. And if you have a story, I want to hear it. Email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
A child grew up too fast, went running wild. Now we don't know who to pray to anymore.
Welcome back to Space Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you with us. Thank you so much for participating. Tomorrow night on the show, Heidi Jane will join us all the way from Australia. We're going to talk intuition, how to tap into your own personal psychic abilities. That's tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time at spacedoutradio.com, starting tomorrow at 3 p.m. in Australia. Well, actually, that'll be Wednesday, 3 p.m. in Australia. Good to have you all with us, especially if you're listening in on the United Public Radio Network, live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. Thank you for being with us. And if you're listening live in Las Vegas on Renegade Talk Radio, yes, we are loving being part of Sin City's radio action. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember, the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Bothrio Sideris. Bothrio Sideris is our password. Make sure you use it wisely if you're a space traveler. Hey, if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn, download this show and others on iTunes, and of course our website is spacedoutradio.com. While there, we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club. It's only $5 a month. We bring in Eric Markham, Eric Cooper, and Everett Thiemer, my team of dastardly E's, to finish up the final hour of Space Out Radio tonight.
Hey,
how you doing?
I'm doing good. So I just want to explain to people, sometimes if you're listening in on the Spaced Out Radio side, because we are waiting for Revolution Radio to finish up with their questions, we sometimes have a little bit of dead air that goes on right at the beginning of coming out of a break. It's not that we're screwing up or anything, but we just want to time everything out because it would sound kind of silly with Revolution Radio bleeding in to the background of what we're doing on the Spreaker and Space Out Radio side. So that's kind of why we have a little bit of dead air for a few seconds right there. It's all about timing when you're doing mass syndication at the same time on internet radio. Gentlemen, how are we?
I'm doing fine.
Good, how are you?
You know what? I would be okay if I could get over this stupid cold. My little guy has been sick for about 9-10 days, and he's getting better, but of course, you know, as he gets better, mom and dad get worse. You know how it goes.
Yeah, I think everybody's getting over a little something.
The worst part about it is I can handle any cold, but a chest cold, which I have right now, where your chest feels really scratchy and dry, it's driving me nuts tonight. Just driving me nuts.
Oh, I'm still clearing up from the pneumonia I had last month.
Yeah, I got over the flu. The important thing, though, is with you and Eric, Dave, we couldn't tell listening.
Well, you know what? That's why we do what we do. So, anyhow, we move on here. We were talking about Mars the first 2 hours. And Dr. Zubrin, a very brilliant guy who believes we need to be putting more focus on going to Mars. Eric, you sat with me for the last 2 hours here. I'm curious what you think. Do you think this is just a waste of money, this type of project, or do you think that this is valuable scientific research for the sake of mankind heading into the next millennium?
I think it's very necessary. I don't think as a species we're going to survive. Right now, all of our eggs are in one basket. if something catastrophic happened to the Earth, and it's happened in the past, there's been mass extinctions, we're gone. So I think we need to reach out. I think we need to colonize Mars. I think we need to do something about Venus, try terraforming it with bacteria. There's bacteria they could unleash on Mars that would eat the atmosphere, and it would take time. I mean, it's not a shake and bake. It's going to happen in a lifetime. It's going to take several lifetimes for this to happen. But I think the future of the human race depends on us getting off the home planet and spreading out.
What do you think, Everett? Do you think that we need to go there? Or do you think that we need to concern ourselves more about what's happening here?
I think we need to start looking out that way. It's the next step in space exploration. There are a lot of reasons, from eventually, our species is going to have to leave this planet. So we have to look at that, what we can do and plan for when that happens. I do think, though, that some of his ideas are very big picture, and he's not really focusing on the first steps. He seems to have a lot of ideas of the future, but not necessarily right now.
And how about you, Cooper?
I agree, because we're destroying this planet as it is. But what about the other planets that are out there besides Mars that are Earth-like, that they've come out and said are Earth-like, that are more habitable than Mars? That would be my question.
Where are you thinking?
Well, I don't have anything. I can't give you a name off the top of my head, but I just know through the research I've done, there's other planets out there that are more habitable.
Well,
but those are hundreds of light years away, aren't they?
I didn't think all of them were. Help me out here, Markham.
well, I'm thinking that
I thought one of the planets of or one of the ones that circles around Jupiter was something that was somewhat habitable.
Well, they're thinking Europa may have a sea under its ice. As a matter of fact, they're sure that under this thick layer of ice, there's a liquid water ocean on Europa, and it's kept warm by the tidal forces. The way as Europa orbits Jupiter, the pull and stretch is what keeps the water from freezing completely down to the core. I believe in one of the moons of Saturn, I think it's Enceladus, they think they could probably colonize it. But as far as a full-fledged, a planet, probably Mars is our best bet, because it's as close to Earth-like conditions as we have in our, without the extremes. It's close to Earth as we have. That would probably be our baby step right there.
I guess the way I look at it is we have so many things that we need to be doing on this planet, and it seems like we're good at doing a little bit of a lot of different topics, but we're not good at doing a lot with the little that we have going on here. I think of the famine problems, getting fresh water to people. Even in the U.S. where, fracking has killed water in parts of Michigan. All sorts of different things that we could be doing in order to create a better lifestyle for us here. And I realize that this is going to open up a whole Pandora's box in regards to what people should be spending money on. But on the flip side, if we have populations like the Chinese, like India, like other countries in the world where they just keep expanding with no sign of slowing down, then we may have to look at other possibilities. But right now, as I've read a lot of comments in the chat rooms tonight, I truly don't believe we are ready to destroy another planet the way we have absolutely abused this one.
No.
Well, I think, no, we need to get away from this the petro economy. We need fusion. We need alternate fuel sources. I mean, you've got a band of thugs in the Middle East that are basically holding the entire world ransom because we need oil. And oil should be used for plastics. There's no...
We've got a band of thugs here. Not just in the Middle East. We have a band of thugs here in America.
True enough.
But, you know, Dave, one of the reasons I asked the question I did in the chat room about manned missions versus terraforming is if we design experiments and design programs to terraform Mars, is there something we can learn from that to begin to figure out a way to, I don't want to say alter, but modify our environment in either allowing environments that can't grow food to grow food, or even to reverse any kind of greenhouse effect that we're creating?
Well, one of the fallacies of the CO2, you know, the greenhouse gas CO2 is plants need CO2 to produce oxygen. And if we limit CO2, we're actually hurting the ecosphere because we're not giving the plants what they need to photosynthesize and to survive. So the whole regulating CO2, they have actually, there's a study out there, and I don't have it off the tip of my tongue because I read it quite some time ago, that's suggesting that regulating the CO2 has actually limited plant growth and has had a bad effect on the oceans, which is our major, you know, rainforests aside, the oceans are the biggest oxygen producers on our planet because of all the phytoplankton.
Uh-huh. Well, I guess my question then, Eric Markham, would be, how do we create an atmosphere that would be safe for people, safe for animals, safe for food?
Well, we got to quit cutting our rainforest down. We got to quit...
I'm saying on Mars.
Oh, on Mars? That is going to evolve pretty much naturally because we're going to... Of course, we're going to have the greenhouses to grow our food, but one of the things that always occurs with an invasive species, something is going to escape that greenhouse. So Mars is going to end up being terraformed by accident or by design. And that's just going to be a natural evolution of being there. And once we have plants getting a foothold, they might just be very simple, like grasses or something, just basic horsetail, something that one of the more primitive or even archaebacteria, the blue-green algae, something is going to start putting oxygen into the atmosphere. So it's going to happen one way or the other. It would be better for us if once we're there, we develop hybrids or we develop plants or bacteria. Bacteria are one of the best things to use because their reproductive rate is just ungodly. You can start with one colony forming unit, and before you know it, you've got 3 liters of bacteria in 24 hours. So we would probably have to harness one of the blue-green algae or some primitive form of photosynthesizing bacteria, and that is, you know, pools of that would get the balls rolling. And from there, it probably wouldn't take but 100 years. I don't think it would take that long because once you get the cycle started, there's a point where it just takes over.
the problem that I see with colonizing Mars is the people that we are going to send up there, they're of a political affiliation, whether they're scientific or not. And therefore, what happens up there becomes so controlled and in a way so governmental. I don't see any possible way of getting around an apolitical side to try and do this for the benefit of mankind. What do you think, Eric Cooper?
Say it one more time.
In regards to colonizing Mars, I mean, we're going to be taking people up there. They're going to have some sort of political affiliation one way or another. You know, are we going to be able to keep Mars away from being politicized?
No, because it's going to be the same quagmire we have down here until we get past the mindset. I asked you earlier, I'm not sure if you saw it or not, but what about Bigelow Industries? Did Bigelow Industries, I know they're privatizing space travel. I'm not sure how far they got because I lost track of that. But did Bigelow Industries ever actually get off the ground?
I have no idea. I haven't even researched.
Bigelow Industries, they weren't focusing so much on the actual space travel. Weren't they focusing on building pods that would be habitats or habitable for launch out into space? I don't know if they were designed for planetary use to be on a planet, but they were basically like survival pods that they were focusing on, I believe.
Yeah, I thought
right, and
orbital
and that
stations.
that might have been it. That might have been it. But no, Dave. In regards to your question, yeah, I think we need to get the human race needs to get off its mindset, its politics. I mean, society right now is in such a turmoil. Just they can't get past race. They can't get past politics. They can't get past anything. They're going to go up and destroy Mars or wherever else they go.
Mm-hmm. Everett, what's your thought on the political side of things?
I think there's no way to keep it from being politicized. Even if you have a private company do it, that company is going to be based somewhere, and that government is going to want a stake in it. If you do it through any government, of course, it's going to be politicized. I don't think there's any way around keeping it from being a political battle.
What about you, Eric Cooper? Do you see this, Eric Markham, do you see this possibly being one of those situations where we could actually do something for the sake of mankind rather than political initiative?
I would like to see that. I think what's going to happen is people are going to go there with a mindset. But I think that the extremes and what it's going to take to survive is going to give them a wake-up call. And I believe the people of Mars are going to evolve into their own political structure. They might bring the ideas from the home planet, but it's just like when we when the British colonized the world. Wherever Australians have a different mindset than the English. Americans have a different mindset. Canadian, as people get there and are struggling to survive, they adapt their idealism to survival. We're a pragmatic species in that we're not going to hang on to... Stupidity is not going to get you survival on a place like Mars. You're going to have to adapt and have an open mind, or you're going to go extinct.
When you hear someone like Dr. Zubrin speak in regards to what has happened on Mars and the climate, we've also had a lot of people here on Spaced Out Radio, especially over the last few weeks, talk about the fact that they believe that Mars has already been colonized. Now, I believe personally that we have been there. Of course, that's only an opinion. I have talked to enough people privately and on this show that have had experiences with it, where I think that we are way ahead of the game in technology than even some of the smartest people like Dr. Zubrin are familiar with. Everett, do you think that we have gone further than what has been pronounced publicly?
I think there's a very good possibility of it. I think if we have, the evidence has been relatively well hidden. I wouldn't say that we haven't, and I think that there's a very good chance that we have, but I'm not sure. I just don't have the evidence.
Well, what's your gut feeling?
My gut feeling is that, yeah, we've been there.
How about you, Markham?
I think after some of the guests we've had on, I'm willing to entertain the fact, that either we came from there because we tried to survive some kind of cataclysm that turned Mars into what it is now, or we're there now. I'm willing to entertain that. There just seems to be too much. There seems to be too much smoke for there not to be a fire somewhere.
Well, go into detail about that. This is radio, guys.
Okay. Well, you have our guest that had the arcologies. And I was skeptical at first, but the more I looked at his pictures, the more and without him saying, okay, this is a structure that looks like this, I was starting to see the structure. For the most part, I was starting to see what he was talking about, like the Egyptian head, almost the Sphinx-shaped head, and some of the other structures that look like multiple sculptures. I'm willing to entertain that some culture was there, and possibly because the way the things he was pointing out tended to look like Mesoamerican art and Egyptian art. I'm almost wondering if those weren't two parent cultures that escaped from Mars. And then we've had our guests that says we're actively on Mars. There's a, like an army base on Mars, and that there's reptilians. And he's not the only one that said that there's a secret space program, which, one of my favorite lines in a movie was, do you really think they're spending $2,000 on a toilet seat? When you look at military procurement, all that money is going somewhere.
Yep.
Cooper, I gave you last word on this one.
Well, like I had asked earlier, I don't see the face on Mars, for example. I don't see all those artifacts like what Martin was saying. It's just being little forms of rock that happen to look like something there. No, I've seen the pictures of the faces on Mars. For years, and there's been too many other. There's been too much other going on. Guests come out and like Markham said, they've come out and talked about it. What about the not Pathfinder, but the space telescopes that went past Mars? There's been two of them that crashed, and there was no reason for it. There's something's keeping us from looking at it, and there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. So I would have to say, yeah, we have been there. Something might already still be there, and no.
I'm still a little confused on that. I'm still not too sure what is going on in regards to Mars. I think there's enough evidence to know that we have probably visited. How much, I don't know. But, I think it's something that we have been there. And I think a lot of people, in my opinion, and my scientific opinion on a scale of 1 to 10 is probably about a 0.25 with all my knowledge. You know, so in the end, I really do believe, you know, the words of our guests, you know, that there has been some sort of action on there. There's too much information. All right? So I think it's one of those things, buddy, where we really need to check out what the source is. You know? We need to check out what the source is. So, moving on in regards to space technology, do you think, Eric Cooper, that the moon is more important and rediscovering the moon is more important than worrying about Mars at this time?
I would say yes, and I would say no, because, I mean, again, we talk about Mars and skepticism about whether we've been there, but at the same time, you've got the same skepticism about have we been on Mars, we know we've been on Mars, but is there still something on Mars? And, I mean, you've had guests that also said there were bases on Mars. We've heard Neil Armstrong talk about there's aliens on the dark side of the moon. There's been theories about the moon being hollow and being an artificial satellite. So I don't know. We can talk about Mars, and then we kind of have to go the same route with the moon.
Everett, what's your thoughts?
I kind of agree with Eric in a sense. Part of me says we've already been to the moon, so let's take the next step and try to go farther. But then there are so many things that we haven't really proven or discovered or explored on the moon that I can see wanting to go back and exploring more of the moon. So to me, it's kind of like maybe pick one or the other and really focus on that and not even worry about the other one for now. It's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of another.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid that without something besides some organization besides NASA or some government-controlled entity, the truth about what they're finding out there is never going to be believed. I think we're going to have some independent, privately funded exploration of space, the people that are not answerable to a government, and if they find, you know, bases on the moon, they can say, hey, there's bases on the moon. And enough independent eyes can come behind them and say, well, yeah, they're right, there are. I don't think we're ever going to get the truth as long as, or we won't believe it even if it is the truth, as long as all of our information is coming from one source.
Can I ask Eric a question?
Yeah, go right ahead, man.
Eric, with all of the privatization of space exploration and all these companies beginning to rev up, are there any universities or any colleges that are working with them or tying in with them saying, when you do this, we want to conduct these kinds of experiments, or we want to try this program? Or is it simply the educational system is kind of ignoring all of these private space exploration companies?
Well, they're sending up some minor, I mean, nobody is doing pharmacology like they need to, you know, sending up spiders to see how they build webs in zero-G. I mean, yeah, that's science for the sake of science, but I don't think that there's any major funding and major grant proposals out there because we don't have the infrastructure in space right now. Anything they're doing is pretty much on the International Space Station, and it seems to me they're kind of spinning their wheels. It doesn't look like there's a lot coming out of there, and that the research is just, you know, like school kid, 6th grade science project crap is getting done up there. They've done a little bit with agriculture, seeing how plants will grow, but, you know, I think until we have a orbiting, we're either going to have a base on the moon that we can do reduced gravity, crystal structures. I think it's going to have to be some kind of permanent infrastructure in space, easier to get to, because right now you're looking at how much it costs to put something into orbit. It's, if you wanted to do something with pharmaceuticals, the cost would be prohibitive just getting what you need up into space to do the work, to, do the synthesis. So I think we got to come up with a better way of getting there, and we have to have a more permanent orbital infrastructure in order for the colleges to start really firing up. I'm sure there's plenty of good ideas out there, but if it costs $1 billion to get your experiment up into space, it's not going to happen.
I still think we need to focus on the moon. I think after 40 plus years, it's time to go back. I mean, what are they hiding? That's what I want to know. What are they hiding on the moon that we haven't gone back? It's like, oh, well, we've done it, and now we can tell everybody we've done it, so we don't have to waste any more money. But there's a lot that could have happened on the moon. How about a moon base? How about a public moon base where we could do scientific experiments there if it's not there already? You know what I'm saying? So I think there is a lot of things we could be doing from the moon. And then if you bring that to the moon, you could get people excited about seeing their tax dollars going towards Mars. You could probably alleviate a lot of that cost by taking people from other countries, seeing what they're doing, see what NASA's doing, or the Russian aerospace agency is doing, and then combine the efforts to go to Mars. So that way it's alleviating costs on one secular group, namely right now, the American public. Okay? So I guess what I'm saying is we could technically reestablish what we have by going back to the moon, because it's almost been half a century, and get people excited about it. But all this talk, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, we talk about the moon's not exciting anymore. Watching a rocket go to the space station, as cool as it is when you're standing outside and the International Space Station flies over, I would sooner love seeing something on the moon than watching a space station that we're seeing how ants procreate on the space station. That doesn't intrigue me at all.
No.
Yeah, I can see that. It is weird how we kind of sidestepped the moon. We've sent probes out to photograph, basically every square foot of Pluto, and we've sent rovers to Mars. This is all stuff we could have done first to the moon.
Yeah, now Pluto's not a planet. What happened with that?
Oh, that's just a bunch of angry scientists. Angry scientists.
Yeah, you got to do something with that PhD in astrophysics that doesn't make you a living.
Right.
Well, I think we do need to go to the moon. I think that's our jumping off point, because we don't know what we're going to find. Metal ores, and we might be able to build what we need once we establish an industrial structure on the moon. We might be able to build everything we need to get to Mars on raw materials on the moon. And it's predicted that one of those satellites, I think it's Phobos, the one that's shaped like a big potato, is eventually going to crash on Mars. Its orbit is decaying. Get on that thing, see what it is, and mine it. If it's going to hit the ground anyway, you're not upsetting any great balance. You're just getting something out of the way. You're preventing it'd be a shame to terraform Mars and get it all nice and comfy, and then you got a potato-sized, that huge asteroid come in and wipe out your civilization.
I think the only way we could get around the politics and the civilization crap is to design some kind of UN, basically taking the brightest scientists from each country that were, I don't know, in some way, shape, or form completely neutral and have them just focus on colonization.
Like a UN of space, only not a not a bureaucratic quagmire, but an actual force for discovery.
Just make it maybe one politician, I don't even like saying politician, but one leader in charge of all the leading scientists that were in that particular group of people. And have them that's all they do is focus on globalization.
I think the problem there is if you have one, there's this weird balance with group dynamics. If you have one leader, then he's going to steer, even if it's subconsciously, he's going to steer things his way. If you do it by committee, nothing will get done, because that's one of the biggest problems. That's one of the biggest problems in research in this country right now. There's a cancer treatment that I believe was proposed by Princeton. One of the U.S. universities came up with this idea of a cancer cure. Well, before they got so caught up in the red tape and the committee, the Chinese got wind of it and said, screw that, jump on it. And they've actually cured a guy's lung cancer using American research, but because it got tied up in committee and regulations, they basically stole the technology. We'll probably be getting our cancer cure out of China. So you'd have to avoid that. You'd have to, I don't know how the way group dynamics work, if you could have a space agency that didn't have that kind of infighting. Probably, the only time humans all seem to pull together is when we have a common enemy. So they would have to have some boogeyman in space probably to get everybody focused in one direction. And I would not like to see our space exploration go in that direction.
I wouldn't like that either, but it still comes down to cost. It still comes down to who's going to eat the bill, and frankly, I really don't see, with the military-industrial complex going on and the uproar of the Middle East, I can't see the American people, for one, wanting to throw another $45-50 billion at a space agency to go to Mars.
No.
Not without some sort of return, and that becomes where it gets politicized again.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, science for the sake of science has disappeared at probably the dawning, of the 20th century. Now, if there's not a payback, if there's not a bottom line, half the discoveries that we have grown up with probably would not have occurred in this current condition. It's so regulated, and it's all publish or perish. There's no science for the sake of science. Very little. Most of it is being done by graduate students that are just taking the university's resources and going rogue. The actual research and development, it's stagnant. It's all, okay, let's not cure cancer. Let's learn to treat it as a chronic disease. That way, we can make money off somebody for their life, and, you're basically putting a price tag on life, so they'll pay whatever they have to pay to get the drug that's going to keep, give them a few more years of life. It's become such a corrupt system.
Everett, what's your thoughts on all that?
It's tough. I mean, Eric's right. There is very little science for pure science. I mean, I don't exactly know how to alter my answer to sound different from Eric, because, he makes some great points.
Cooper?
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. Everything's all about the dollar. It's not even about the dollar and getting their name out there. It's not even about science anymore. It's all about. I mean, look how much the pharmaceutical companies, for example, look how much they're charging for things that, in a lot of cases, herbs do the same thing, but they'll make herbs illegal, even though they'll cure things, all because of pharmacology. So no, there's no way to get around it.
Markham, with Dr. Zubrin, we did talk about seeds. Like, we'd have to take some sort of seeds up there, and earth water up there. Everett, your phone is getting really crackly for some reason. I don't know why, but it was. Okay. But I'm just wondering, Eric, in regards to the seeds that we would have to take, what kind of food would we have to take? Would we have to bring literally tons of soil up there? You know, when I think about what Dr. Zubrin was talking about, I see literally us having to launch, 50 to 100 rockets up there, specialized rockets up there, literally at the same time, almost at the same time, in order to get up there properly, because we got to be able to prep for food. We have to have enough water. We have to have proper oxygen. It just seems, if you send one rocket up with 10, 20 people, that just doesn't seem enough for for sustainability, or even to start sustainability, without things like enough water, enough food, enough seeds for growing, because we really don't know if it's going to grow on there. So you're going to have to get enough food until emergency rockets can either A, come get you, or B, drop off more food.
Well, I think some of the growing experiments, you don't have to have soil necessarily there's hydroponics, in which there's not a soil, but the root system is submerged in a nutrient. But that's going to take the water, tons of water. But one of the things that I heard proposed, they're worried about the radiation dose you would get going to Mars. One of the ways to get around that would be jacket the initial craft, your first colony ship, jacket it with water between the outer hull and the inner hull, and put a spin on it. That way, the radiation doesn't stay in one spot. You get kind of an artificial gravity from the spin, and then when you get there, you've got your water. And then I don't think the soil, so much has got to be done as far as just baseline infrastructure and baseline research. We might not need to take soil, because there's a lot of plants that thrive in an iron-rich soil. They chelate, or they will pick the soil, pick the iron out of the soil. We're not sure at this point whether Martian soil is fertile. Can it be made fertile? I think we got to send a small group, probably a dozen. We got to send them there first to do this basic groundwork before we can seriously start sending any kind of colonists. There's going to have to be some pioneers that go and set up the infrastructure. I don't think there's any way to just do a shake and bake colony on Mars that would be cost effective. It costs too much to get stuff into orbit. It costs too much to get there. It's going to have to be in small steps. It might take 100 years of small colonies getting the infrastructure set up before, get it to where all you have to take are people. Once you get, and do it slowly, you're going to have to account for, people. People are going to reproduce. So you're going to have babies born on Mars. You're going to have to deal with food and regulate how much colonization you allow for quite some time.
I agree. So do you think then, Eric, that we would have to send robots up there in order to build the infrastructure before we send people?
I think that would be a good idea. Somebody put out the idea of the 3D printer. I just saw a clip somewhere, probably on Facebook, of this 3D printer making a concrete house. I mean, but like I say, you have to go and see what's available there. So you don't want to import everything. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. You don't want to send somebody. You don't want to send unnecessary stuff to Mars. But at this point, we don't know what's necessary. Some basic human exploration. You might need equidistant. My idea would always be along the equator, put equidistant, maybe 6 research centers. They could explore. They would have overlapping territory. They could go, along the equator and up and down, and they could actually, at this point, start surveying Mars, see what's there. And I just don't think we're going to be able to do a one trip, set everything up, and have a colony. I think we're going to face some horrible losses, and I think it's going to take a very slow, stepwise technique before we can do anything about it. It's just unless something pops up, a cheaper way of getting things transported into orbit, we're kind of screwed as far as reaching out to the outer planets because it costs so much to get anything into orbit. This liquid fuel rocket crap is just not going to really take us into the next generation of space exploration. We need something else to get our goods into, our resources into orbit. Once we're there, it's no problem. You can use mass drivers to inject. You could take raw asteroids if they had a mineral you needed, you could use a mass driver to shoot it toward the planet you're working on and inject it into an orbit. But right now, everything's liquid fuel rockets, and that's not going to be feasible. That's not going to get us where we need to go.
Still seems like a lot.
What about the Pathfinder? I thought we had the Pathfinder on Mars. What happened with that? And I thought they were testing soil with the Pathfinder.
Well, there again, you've got one organization, one source for your information. If some administrator at NASA doesn't want that information to get out, it doesn't get out. There's no independent verification. But I don't think what they're, taking this little patch of soil in one area, that's not the same as getting a survey team out there that within a month could have, using a spiral from their home base, just, a spiral that reaches out. They're going to find more and better. I mean, just that little, takes 2 days to get somewhere, scoop of dirt, gee, what's in it? That's not, we're never going to do anything on Mars at that rate. We're going to have to get boots on the ground, and they're going to have to set up the infrastructure.
Hey, Eric, talking about one source of information, wasn't there back in the 80s, there was a scientist involved with NASA, and I forget his name. He had designed some tests to test for life.
Levin.
And his results indicated to him that there was, at the very least, biological life on the planet, and he wanted to say something about that, but when the press conference came, he was basically told to say something else.
Yep, that's Dr. Levin, and his experiment showed, he believes to this day that his experiment showed bacterial, there's a proper word for it, but anyhow, methane that was produced by an organism. So that there was life on Mars. It might have just been bacterial, but his design, what they said was it had been contaminated with Earth microbes or some such. Anyhow, they poo-pooed it, but to this day, Dr. Levine swears that's not what happened, and his experiment showed that there was life on Mars.
Well, we only got about 5 minutes left here, guys. What do you think? What do you think the reaction would be, Coop, if we sent colonization teams up to Mars and they literally found artifacts?
What would the reaction be from who? The human side, the Earth?
Human side.
I think a lot of people would be like, I told you so. Because a lot of us, you included, have, kind of thought that from the beginning. And when you have scientists that come out and say, no, it doesn't exist, and I firmly believe there are artifacts up there. That's my opinion. But, hands down, I think in a lot of the people that just didn't know would start believing, there really is other life,
What about you, Everett? What do you think?
I think there would be more panic with that than there would be with disclosure on Earth. I think people would be a little bit frightened, but partially frightened because of all of the misinformation, everything the different space agencies have told them about, there's nothing up there. I think it would be a shock, and I think it would cause people to lose more faith in their governments than maybe some form of disclosure here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Markham, do you believe that if we did, say, send man up there and we ended up finding some sort of artifact in regards to Mars colonization previously, do you think that could endanger any type of full human colonization?
I think at first it would. I think at first it would be the shock, because, you've got the people that believe it's already there, but then you've got the rest that think it's just science fiction. But I think once the shock wore off, you would have a groundswell, a grassroots, and just let's go up there and see what it was all about. We're a curious race. I don't think it would keep us held back for long. I think the initial shock would be a little overwhelming, but people have short memory. Things that were unconceivable in the 70s are taken for fact today. So I don't think it would take too long for us to get excited about it and want to know more. I know the archaeologists would be drooling to get up there and check it out. So there would be a scientific rush to get up there and see what was going on.
Gentlemen, it's been good. It's been a good show.
It was a fun 3 hours.
Well,
it was.
We got about 90 seconds left here. Coop, do me a favor. Tell everybody how they can find out a little bit more about S4.
S4. You can find our link on here on Spaced Out Radio. Just look for the S4 with E squared link on Spaced Out Radio. Right now we're doing a series on fairies, and we're going to wrap it all up with, so we just got done with the alien race series, and we're going to compare them. Been a fun show. We actually went overtime last night, did a 3-hour show on, we're going over fairy lore and the description of a lot of them.
Excellent. Gentlemen, I want to say thank you for everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Well,
thanks for having us.
Well, that's what we like to do around here. And Eric, thank you for bailing me out tonight. My throat is just killing me from this stupid cold.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's what we like to do around here. And, you know, I still am having, for those on the Space Out Radio SOR Space Traveler side on Facebook, I still am, even after clearing my computer with a bunch of adware, I'm still having some troubles in there with Facebook lighting up. I'm not sure if it's Firefox that I'm using or if it's something else. But I don't get it. I really don't get it. You guys hold on for a second. I'm going to wrap this thing up. If you're listening in on the Space Out Radio side, you hear Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy, as we have Mr. Bumblefoot bring us in and take us home every single night on the mighty SOR. It's always good to have Mr. Bumblefoot around. Remember, if you want to catch this show and others, you can go to our YouTube channel, Space Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes. And you know what? We officially signed up for Stitcher as well. So if you're listening in on Stitcher, you can use Stitcher to listen to us. It's always good. We're trying to get everywhere. Soon, my friends, we're going to be a little bit more in tune with what radio should be, and I'm looking forward to it. Tomorrow night on the show, Heidi James will join us. Okay, we are going all the way down to Australia to talk about intuition and how you can tell if you are intuitive tonight. Thanks, Moo Boy, for calling me decent. You're a pretty decent listener yourself. Everyone, I will be here in exactly 21 hours from now, and you all have fun. We'll see you all back. I look forward to it. I hope you do as well. Much appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us. Have a good night. We're done. I'm out. Bye-bye.